Loose Lace, written by Keith Faulkner. "Tie your shoelaces, Max," called Mrs. Mouse, "or one day you're going to fall." But Max was already gone, skipping out into the garden to play in the sunshine. There were more important things to do than worry about silly old shoelaces. "Shoelaces," shouted Mrs. Mouse from the kitchen window. "Do them now, Max." Max looked down at the long shoelaces trailing behind and bent down to tie them. Left over right, right over left, poke it through and pull it tight," he mumbled to himself as he wrestled with the laces. "There, all done," he said proudly to himself, and off he skipped. He'd only skipped about 3 steps when the shoelaces came undone again. "Oh dear," said Max, looking down, but he just kept on skipping. It wasn't that Max was a stupid little mouse. He wasn't. He could do almost anything else. Climb trees, ride his bike, do a cartwheel. He could even read a bit and do some math. He just couldn't tie his shoelaces. Well, not so they stayed tied anyway. What made matters worse was that Max never walked. He always ran like the wind or skipped wherever he went. Mrs. Mouse always said, "One day you'll fall with those shoelaces flapping about." But Max didn't worry about it. He just laughed. He laughed until one day something did happen. Something quite unexpected. Something that Max would remember for a very long time. And something that made the little mouse learn to tie his shoelaces properly. "Max, can you run down to Mrs. Mole's shop and get me a loaf of bread?" asked Max's mother. "Okay, Mum," replied Max, skipping out of the door and down the lane. "Your shoelaces! Tie them now!" shouted Mrs. Mouse as she watched Max disappear down the hill, his shoelaces flapping as usual. But Max didn't hear her. Down the hill the little mouse skipped. He didn't notice old Mr. Rat pushing a wheelbarrow full of vegetables. Max was far too busy having fun. Mr. Rat puffed along slowly. The wheelbarrow was very heavy because it had been a good year for vegetables. Mr. Rat was off to the show to see if he could win any prizes. As he skipped down the hill towards Mrs. Mole's shop, Max soon caught up with old Mr. Rat. Then, just as he was about to skip past Mr. Rat, something happened. Max was skipping at top speed, looking around at the clouds in the sky and the birds in the trees, when he stepped right on one of his flapping shoelaces. Max tripped and fell headlong down the hill. If he'd just fallen on the ground, it would not have been so bad, but when he fell, he crashed right into the back of old Mr. Rat. Now, old Mr. Rat was rather surprised because he wasn't expecting a small mouse to crash into his back. He let go of the handles of the wheelbarrow. Max got up, rubbing his knees. Old Mr. Rat got up, rubbing his back. Then they both stopped rubbing and looked down the hill. There was a heavy wheelbarrow gradually gathering speed as it rolled down the hill. "Stop that barrow!" yelled old Mr. Rat. Max was off, running down the hill as fast as he could go, trying to catch up with the runaway wheelbarrow. Faster and faster went the wheelbarrow, with Max racing along behind. Max was fast, but the barrow was faster. Mrs. Mole heard a rumbling sound and came out of her shop to see what it was. What a shock! Coming straight down the hill was a very big wheelbarrow full of vegetables, being chased by a very small mouse. Outside her shop was a wonderful display of flowers, fruit and vegetables, all neatly arranged in boxes and baskets. She just managed to leap out of the way as the wheelbarrow hurtled past, scattering her fruit, flowers and vegetables in all directions. A little further down the hill, Mr. Rabbit was busy. He was up on a ladder with a can of bright red paint and a big brush, painting the windows of his house. He whistled happily to himself as he painted. Then he stopped whistling. There was a rumbling sound, and it was getting louder. Thunder, he thought to himself, and hoped it wouldn't rain on his new paint. What happened next was far worse than rain. The heavy wheelbarrow, with Max still running behind, thundered by. It hit the bottom of Mr. Rabbit's ladder. The ladder and Mr. Rabbit came down with a thud, and so did the big can of bright red paint, right into Mrs. Rabbit's laundry basket, which was full of clean clothes. At the very bottom of the hill, by the stream, was the otter's cottage, and right in front stood a beautiful cherry tree laden with ripe cherries. Down the hill thundered the wheelbarrow, and behind it raced little Max. There was a tremendous crash as the wheelbarrow hit the cherry tree, and another crash as the tree fell to the ground. Max looked down the hill and saw the awful mess. Mrs. Mole's shop was wrecked, Mr. Rabbit's ladder was broken, and Mrs. Rabbit's laundry was covered with red paint. The otter's cherry tree was knocked down, and Mr. Rat's wheelbarrow was bent beyond repair, and his prized vegetables ruined. And all because of a loose lace.